The Wrong Way Home by Arthur J. Deikman, Uncovering the Patterns of Cult Behavior in American Society. Chapter 2. Hugh and Clara, A Case History. When Hugh and Clara Robinson joined Life Force, it was an open, friendly, informal gathering of people who had become interested in the teachings of a charming man, Thomas Corell, a psychologist who lived in England and whom many of the group had visited. Corell met with whomever wanted to consult him, functioning more like a teacher than a traditional psychotherapist. He had developed a system of philosophy and techniques, life force psychology, designed to bring about psychotherapeutic change and personality growth. The sophistication of the theory, the effectiveness of the techniques, the sweetness and joy emanating from the man, in particular, his emphasis on the spiritual combined to make Corell and what he taught very attractive to the highly educated. Psychologically oriented men and women, mostly in their 20s and 30s, who began to meet together to carry on and promote his work. The Robinsons had first encountered life force psychology when they participated in a workshop led by a very dedicated couple, Alex and Barbara Monroe. During that weekend, Hugh and Clara were guided in individual fantasies that were like dream journeys. And for the Robinsons, the results were uplifting beyond their expectations. Clara, I had the experience of feeling more loved and accepted than I'd ever felt in my whole life. It was a real downflow of energy within me. Just amazing. I had the feeling that this was something that I'd always wanted, that I had been looking outside myself for. And there it was. Hugh, I had a very deep personal experience. Realizing that I wasn't alone, that there were other people who cared about the same things I did, I felt a brotherhood among these people. After this experience, the Robinsons wanted to learn more. They took several courses of study with the Monroes, traveled abroad to study with Thomas Corell for a few months, and decided to devote themselves full-time to studying and teaching life force psychology. At that time, Clara Robinson was over 30, married, the mother of a young child. She had a bachelor's degree in English literature and had completed additional graduate work as well. Clara's relationships with her parents, siblings, and peers had been good. A leader in both high school and college. She was superior in intelligence and socially adept. Clara's involvement with the Life Force group was rooted in her sense of special beauty in the world, a transcendent quality when she was a little girl. A transcendent quality. When she was a little girl, she spent a lot of time alone in nature. The trees and birds were a special source of delight, as was her perception that light was very nearby, a feeling of things being very beautiful, in a way that I never found too many people to share it with. I had that when my child was born too, the miracle of life. Except for one teacher, the first person she met with whom she could share this reality was her husband. She remembers thinking, he knows the secret thing too. This shared sense of greater reality was a central theme to their relationship. Claire wondered why more people didn't have that feeling of special beauty. Later, life force psychology provided a way of understanding that experience. For the first time, Clara could share her perception with others. She could integrate this secret, precious part of herself into her life in a beneficial way. She found a way to express herself and to teach principles and techniques that she believed could help others as well. The system answered other needs as well. After Clara and Hugh were married, they discovered the human potential movement, and Clara joined a therapy group that unleashed a great deal of fear in her. Her anxiety became progressively worse, and psychotherapy did not help. At this point in her life, Clara encountered the Monroes and had her initial transformation session, a profound and exhilarating experience, convincing her that the transformation process, as taught by Alex and Barbara, would provide the help she was seeking. The experience took place in a group setting. Clara had volunteered to work on her fear. Quote, in those days, I would do anything to get help, Alex Monroe asked. What are you afraid of? Clara, I'm afraid I will float away. Alex, can you see what you're can you see what you are afraid you will float away from? Clara, no, but I know what it is. It's myself as a grown woman. Alex, can you see her? Clara. And then I saw this really wonderful grounded Earth Mother, like an enormous earthly woman, the opposite of my kind of thin, wispy, mystic identification. And I cried, and cried, and cried. It was just wonderful, and he, Alex, worked with that in dialogue and imagery, and then he said, "There's a wise man up in the sun." So I went up towards the sun, and there was a wise man, and he said to me, "My child." And I climbed into his lap, like a child. He was very much like a father. As I retell it, I realized that I just felt like I was home. I felt a downflow of love and affection that I have never felt before or since. Like being totally okay. This must be what I have been looking for. I'm really all right. It was very important. Like this big sigh in it. I could rest. It was that experience that made me feel that I needed to do more of whatever this system was. Alex told her she could think of that wise person anytime she wanted. Afterwards, Clara did that, and it helped calm her, as did visualizing the Earth Mother. This vivid experience of what I would interpret as the dependency dream was profoundly important to Clara. It felt like unconditional love, being totally accepted. She felt it had spiritual connotations as well. Clara thought everyone must want and should have this acceptance. He was also over 30 when he joined Life Force. He had studied at Princeton and was working on a PhD in psychology. Like Clara, he had good relationships with his family and was close to his father and mother, whom he described as spiritual people, although not formally religious. They were just committed to making changes for a better world. His father and mother both worked for liberal causes. Throughout his school years, Hugh had been an outstanding student and leader, yet he felt isolated from his peers. There was an artistic, sensitive side to himself that he was unable to share. Hugh appeared strong, confident, and successful in studies and athletics. He was a musician, popular with women, and the leader of his class. Inside, however, he felt alone, missing the security of his home environment where the spiritual part of himself was shared and supported. He strongly associates this spiritual aspect of his life with his love of music. When asked about early mystical experiences, he refers to his artistic side. I had this intense, private, spiritual life, which I had always experienced in terms of music, what I would call superconscious experiences. And then at age 19, in the Rockies in Colorado, I had a spontaneous experience of unity with everything. That never left, in a way. I think that was always a backdrop to my searching. This sense of spiritual Hugh felt unable to share with his friends. Looking back, he recognizes that his peers' jealousy of his accomplishments added to his sense of isolation. There was this mixture of not feeling really connected, but yet being admired by them and being a leader. In college, Hugh had a few good friends, but never felt more like a loner. He was disillusioned with the pretensions of academic life and ceased trying to achieve the top. At this time, he encountered Life Force. He was ripe for something to believe in. It's a quote. Ripe for something to believe in, to put my energy into. I had a wife and child, and I didn't feel too comfortable with what it meant to be in the world and make a living. I was anxious about my life and wasn't sure that it was going to work out. I'd have to leave thing after thing because somehow it didn't satisfy me. During that first workshop with the Monroes, Alex conducted Hugh in a long fantasy in which he climbed a mountain. At one point, Alex suggested that Hugh become a beautiful tree that had been created in the fantasy. He did so. There was a powerful flow of energy, of roots and light, very powerful. I had never experienced anything like this before. Alex then suggested that he leave the tree, continue up the mountain, and then look at the sun. Out of the sun, this figure, and he came down, Greek with a Franciscan robe on, a marvelous black beard, sort of green eyes, very alive and powerful figure. He just looked at me, and we embraced, and there was this wonderful feeling between us. Then we threw our arms around each other, and we said, "Let's take on the world." There was this sense that we were going to work together to help the rest of the world. The guided fantasy went on for about an hour. At the end of it, Hugh opened his eyes. The original group of 25 had been reduced to 4 in addition to Alex and Barbara. It was midnight. 2 of those who stayed had met Hugh previously. 2 had not. They were all men. This was overwhelming to me. It was as powerful as the daydream. These people had stayed to be with me during this thing. Here were people who were sticking by me and not abandoning me for not understanding. And then Barbara said to me, "You don't have to be alone anymore." I just wept and wept. But I didn't have to be alone anymore. Hugh and Clara shared an intuitive sense of a larger reality that was very important to them. However, I believe that this perception was confused with unresolved dependency longings that led them to interpret the guided daydream as spiritual and to accept the Monroes as guides or agents in that domain. Their enthusiasm for this new system was also due to its affirmation of their perceptions of the numinous world, perceptions which had not been acceptable to their peers. Suddenly, they found meaning, purpose, and helpful work to do. The procedures and theoretical system of life force psychology had been put together by Thomas Corll, who had taught the Monroes when they had visited him 4 years before. Alex and Barbara were Corell's chief disciples, seemingly modeled after him in gentleness and altruism and in the loving attention they paid to those who came to learn and be helped by the system. They were totally dedicated to bringing this wonderful new teaching to others, to the world they believed needed it so badly. Over the next 4 years, life force psychology became popular. Numerous workshops were given, and training sessions were developed for mental health professionals. The Robinsons had many sessions with the Monroes and received personal instruction abroad from Corell, as did all of those who joined Life Force Group at the initial stage. Soon Clara and Hugh began to lead workshops and training sessions, moving to be near the Monroes so they could be more involved in the work. They felt they had the life they always wanted. The spiritual values formerly split off from their working lives were now directly expressed and shared with the group of peers to whom they felt connected. People who validated and gave support to each other. Hugh could now put his leadership abilities to use for the cause he believed in. He was appointed to the executive committee of Life Force Psychology Center and conducted workshops and training sessions all over the United States. The theory of life force psychology particularly appealed to him. I loved the ideas. I loved the system. I feel like the most comprehensive and humane way of looking at people I'd found. I could work with these ideas about human nature that fit with how I felt when I played music or studied literature or whatever. There was just a very deep personal connection. It was mental as well as emotional, like being on a frontier. There was a tremendous amount of excitement and intellectual stimulation. For Clara also, life force psychology and life force, the group, fulfilled important needs and involved her deepest feelings. It really fit with what I valued, what I had always hoped for. I must always have been a closet mystic, I suppose. Suddenly, there was a forum for the spiritual, and there was someone teaching who said you can work with people in this way. So I gradually got more involved in teaching, in designing workshops. I was doing work with women at that time, and there was quite a lot of freedom in the beginning to do my own thing. The workshops were attended and they grew, and my confidence in the teaching grew. The members of the Life Force Psychology Center supported and encouraged her teaching. What was exciting for me was that there was a place for my spiritual experience within the psychological system, and I could learn to work with people to evoke that and have them trust that trust and tap into it. Learning how to help people get in touch with more love and compassion and with their creativity, I think affirming is the best word I could use. It felt like I was affirming the best in people. Gradually, this sense of high purpose gave rise to feelings of specialness, which later led to the devaluation of those outside the group and to the elevation of Alex. Clara. During these early years, there was a growing sense that this group was special and we were going to do something special that nobody else was. And that Alex was special. The Robinsons were happy with their teaching role in Life Force. 5 satisfying years went by. They conducted therapy sessions, taught workshops and classes. They believed that what they were doing was making a unique contribution to the world. Hugh in particular felt this to be a time of growth and personal fulfillment. He was an executive of the center and at the same time had good friends and other professional organizations devoted to humanistic and spiritual concerns. He helped plan conferences, gave major presentations, traveled widely, interacted with Life Force groups in other countries. Thus, for a long time, there was a balance between Hugh's involvement with the Life Force Psychology Center and the rest of the world of humanistic and transpersonal psychology. Clara engaged in similar activities, although to a lesser extent. She divided her life between the center work and her family. While Life Force took up a large part of her time and energy, she felt a reasonable share remained for her son and Hugh. Clara and Hugh were both pleased with the way their lives were going, convinced that Life Force was making a unique and vital contribution to the world. Then the center moved to better offices in the city and expanded teaching activities in other parts of the country and to Europe. With that move, the Robinsons' life and that of others in the group became more and more conflicted, painful, and distorted. More time was demanded from each member. This demand was made by Alex Monroe at the beginning of the executive committee, at a meeting of the executive committee, which transmitted it to a larger meeting that included the other members of the group, such as Clara. Pressure for compliance with this and other demands was usually from the group as a whole, although Alex would personally exert extra pressure, if needed, on a bulky member. Clara experienced most of her conflicts with Life Force group over the issue of commitment to her family. There was a competition for time and energy between the group and her son. I dragged my heels against an increased commitment to the group. There was a meeting where we were all supposed to make a commitment to take the work of the center further. I was the last to, as they put it, put my sword on the table. I said, "I'm not sure I can do it. I'm not sure it's really right for me." Finally, Clara agreed. Such conflicts were continual, but she told herself that giving increased time to the center was right because it was needed. Everyone around me seems to think it's okay. All these reasons. Somehow, I let it be all right. I told myself it was all right, even though I didn't feel good about it. There were lots of things like that. The first impulse would be, that isn't right. Then someone questions it. Maybe me, maybe it's someone else, and they get really put down. Sometimes there would be an awful silence in the room. Sometimes it could be 20 people all looking at you incredulously and someone saying, "How could you worry about that? Don't you see that we really need to?" There wasn't any opening for a different point of view. There was no space for other opinions. I told myself it must be right, but I don't think I ever stopped hearing that voice saying it was not right. Thus the group enforced compliance and dissent was stifled. Over the next few years, questionable practices introduced by Alex gradually increased, requiring further suppression of the members' sense of what was right. One such incident concerned a publicity write-up for Clara's workshops. There was a real effort to puff up the write-ups, make them look more impressive. I had taught several night courses at the university, but they wanted to put down that I had taught at the university itself. I remember questioning it, and when you question, from all sides there would come, "Why were you thinking that? This is an opportunity to get our work more known." There would be a response that made me feel like I couldn't keep pushing for it. I backed down a lot. "Clara, how could you suggest that?" was the message. Alex would say, "You were doing such important work and you let that bother you? What a petty little thing to be concerned with." A great deal of the psychotherapeutic processing among center members took place over the telephone. When the issue was tapping phone conversation, Alex, as always, had many justifications. "Clara, incredible, elaborate reasons, sometimes reasons you couldn't even understand, they were so complicated. The idea was that if we had a record of phone calls between people, if something goes wrong, we can have a record and then look to see whose fault it was or what the problem was." As far as outside phone calls were concerned, well, by then, the outside world was the enemy, so we wanted to know exactly what happened. Eventually, Alex asked them to tape everything. "Clara, I really encountered my ability to rationalize. If I had paid attention to all those occasions where everything inside of me said, 'No, this isn't right,' I couldn't have stayed there. If I had really taken a stand, let's say on the taping, and said, 'I will not go along with this.' First of all, it would have taken a kind of strength I don't know I had at the time, because everyone in the room would be saying, 'Clara, you want to have dinner with your son? That's so selfish.' I would have had to be willing to stand there and have everyone in the room say no." Thus, the group enforced compliance by the use of rhetoric that exploited Clara's idealism for the group's own purposes. Alex led the way. He was opposed on grounds of principle. Alex attacked those principles by equating them with selfish desires. The members had doubts about Alex's reasoning, but they never really discussed the matter among themselves out of fear that Alex might learn of it. Sometimes, after a meeting, members would walk home together and say, "God, that was weird, wasn't it?" "Clara, we would sneak those little things to each other, but you could never be sure that the person wouldn't get home and call Alex and say, 'Boy, Clara Robinson was really identifying with her desire nature. You should have heard what Clara said after the meeting.'" This suspicion extended to close friends. I couldn't even be sure that Hugh wouldn't do it. I did that on him. There was no safe person to trust with that intuitive sense of something being wrong. You couldn't be sure. Sometimes someone else would say, "Yeah, I didn't like that either," but you didn't know if that would be kept in confidence. There was no one but yourself to corroborate. If someone coming home had said, "If we had said together it isn't right, what happens to so-and-so?" Any of that would have made a tremendous difference. There was none. The dissent was silenced. Typically, Alex did not demand that members inform on each other. Rather, they were asked to provide information that he could use to help the other person. "Clara, it used to be a way of getting in with Alex. He was always glad for that information. I remember the first time I was asked to give information, Alex said, I'm going to bring this thing up about Jerry, and if you could share that piece in the meeting, that would be very helpful." I remember saying, "I'm not sure that is right." But then the rationale would be that it would really help Jerry. And I'd say, "Oh, that's right. Jerry can learn from that, and if he can see that, that will really help him." A lot of things went under that reasoning. A lot of bad things. Then there were times when people would volunteer. Getting Alex's favor was a pretty important thing, particularly towards the end, getting his approval. He definitely had real favorites, and they'd change. It was never a very secure favoritism. You could lose it at any point. Hugh's experience was similar. Like the others, he wished for Alex's approval, and fear of losing it led him to compromise his principles and avoid dissent. Hugh. There were things that were beginning to happen there that I was uncomfortable about. But because my personal connection had been so deep, I kept saying, it's worth it. This works. It's so good. It's so effective. That I'll overlook. Alex lied. Just little things, like changing the date on leather. But I hated that. And I would say, why do we have to do that? And he would have some quick answer that would say why it was necessary because someone would screw him if he didn't. Basically. And so I said, okay. And then it was lying to people about different situations in order to control them. The executive committee would get together and plan exactly what was going to go in the meeting, what was going to happen, so that there was no trust of the nature of caring or power or whatever in people in the center. But because the work was so good, I loved it, I turned a blind eye. Every year I'd think, something's not right here, and yet something is so right here. We pushed away a lot of stuff. That's what we realize now, but we didn't at the time. Alex's power derived from the assumption that he knew much more than the others about the teaching and thus entitled to special authority. Indeed, it turned out that there had been a secret mystical side to Thomas Carell that only some knew about, a deep involvement in an esoteric group devoted to occult writings. Carell had given occult books to Alex, who eventually began to teach his own version of the elaborate esoteric system to an inner circle at the center, those people whom he felt to be most committed to the work. Hugh. I thought Alex was smarter than me, more evolved because he knew all this occult stuff. He would use chapter and verse to rationalize these things. It was like a priest using the Bible. He read it much more than anyone else, and no one could refute it. Thomas Carell died. The Robinsons later recalled that Alex had begun making disparaging comments about Carell prior to the man's death, remarking that he was too vague, too lax, too generous with his time, too indiscriminate, not focused enough, something of a fuddy-duddy. After Carell's death, some comments were more frequent. Alex became the only source of teaching, and the one who determined whether others would or would not continue to receive its benefits. Barbara Monroe became more and more subordinate, as Alex gradually asserted more and more control over the group's other members. Their dependence on him increased. While he claimed to work and share power with the executive committee, in fact, he subtly retained all the power and control in his own hands. The committee soon realized that their job was to discuss and debate until they reached the decision Alex wanted. Alex did not acknowledge what he was doing and maintained the facade of democracy for a long time after it had become perfectly obvious to others that he was the sole authority. Claire's request for enough time to be with her child was labeled as a selfish desire by the group. She recalls that there had been any respect for her role as mother. There was constant pressure on her to comply with the group's demand for more and more time. First, it was all mornings, and then it was mornings and 2 afternoons, and then 5, and then meetings on Saturday as well. Clara, when you really get it that your family is the whole world, then you'll understand that David is just one of the many children you're responsible for. When we were asked to take the center another step, I dragged my heels. There was this noise in my head. Should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Maybe it will be wrong, and then what? I remember at one point saying, I'll do it. And everything got quiet around me, and the noise in my head stopped. And I thought, God, maybe that is right. What I'm being asked to do to make a fuller commitment to the work, to this good work. and inside me I thought the quiet sense of rightness means I'm doing the right thing to get more involved. After several months of commuting to the new center, the Robinsons moved to the city. The pressure on the group members to give totally of their time and energy became overwhelming. By that time we were working 6 or 7 days a week, leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning and coming back whenever. We had 2 cars and sometimes we had to drive separately. What that did was to fragment our family life. He was having a harder and harder time maintaining balance in his professional life as well. His involvements outside the center drew increasing fire from Alex and the inner circle. He had never been one of Alex's favorites. On the few occasions when Alex had tried to use him as a confidant to help deal with another member, Hugh had felt very uncomfortable and failed the task. On occasions when Hugh disagreed, Alex justified everything with arguments by citing the occult books. Hugh's rebellions against Alex's control were always short-lived. I would kick up a fuss and then I would give in. That's the pattern. All for the good. He would get me on the good. Oh, I see. For that reason, because it's spiritually right? There was always a host of reasons that would evoke my caring for the cause, and then I'd go along with it rather than saying, look, the cause is being violated right here. When Hugh asserted the importance of his family needs, Alex would say, Hugh, if your family was starving and you had 1 pound of wheat, would you make bread for your family, or would you plant it to feed the starving millions? This appeal to a higher purpose, to the greater good, was Alex's stock in trade. It was copied by the group when it needed to pressure uncooperative members. Hugh, it didn't quite fit, but I had to go along with it because intellectually it made sense. I would discount my strong feelings. Everything was to be sacrificed for the greater, the larger, bringing life force into people's lives. I never won a battle. It was just a matter of how long I could stand up to it before it became too painful, and then I would let myself be persuaded and would give in. But then I wouldn't subvert the system by just going right out and doing what I was doing. The executive committee attacked Hugh's outside activities. This allegation of evil began to come at me. Then I was identified with my elemental or selfish nature and so forth. More and more, it would be that I had done something wrong and I had to fix it. And I would try every time I would return from a committee meeting of an outside organization to the executive committee of the center. I was called on the carpet for doing power trips, for not telling them everything that happened, for not getting Alex on the conference program. So I felt increasingly at odds, but I was confused and wanted to do the right thing. I was torn between my loyalties, torn to pieces. Alex planned to establish a graduate school of life force psychology with branches in North and South America and in Europe. It was a very ambitious project and required even more time and effort from group members. The actual establishment of the first of these graduate schools in the city, after the group moved there, was a pivotal event, one which inspired a further intensification of the cult process. Anyone who questioned the direction of the group was seen as an enemy who needed to be controlled or pushed down, whether the questioner was a group member or an outsider. As a result, members became more and more isolated from colleagues and other human service organizations, and their time and energy were even more tightly controlled. Abruptly, Hugh was removed from his position on the executive committee. At a meeting of that body, he was told that he was not contributing to the group mind, asked to leave the executive committee circle and discontinue almost all activities at the graduate school where he had been teaching. He was instead given the lowest, least important assignments and asked to teach beginning workshops. Much of his time was spent cataloging cassette tapes and Xeroxing. Occasionally, when he was allowed to teach a course at the graduate school, his proposal would be severely criticized. I became increasingly filled with fear and self-doubt. Fear of what the group could do to me. Fear of hurt, of rejection. Fear of somehow being alone again. I was very alone and had lost whatever fellowship I had in the early years that had drawn me towards the group. Turned against by people within the executive group that I cared about. At that same time, Clara's loyalties were being drawn away from Hugh towards the group. Lewis, Hugh's close friend, was echoing the group's abuse. Hugh was afraid of being abandoned completely. The isolation he thought he had left behind by joining Life Force now had reappeared within it. I was afraid of being alone, afraid of being cast out of Eden. Even though Eden had turned into hell, afraid of being cast out even further. There was still, well, we're doing the graduate school, Hugh, and you can't think, so you can do these other things and we'll still be nice to you, and we won't tell other people that you are no longer an executive. In other words, they were still caring for me, and I was still grasping for any care I could get. For Clara, also, Eden was turning into hell. Not only did she experience an increasingly painful struggle to meet her son's needs, but her relationship with Hugh came under attack. One evening, late at night, she was called to meet with several executive committee members with whom she had warm ties. They told her that Hugh was having trouble, and that they were having trouble with him. Hugh has been asked not to be on the executive, and we just want you to know that we really value you. We want you to stay no matter what happens. We want you to know that we really trust what you do. Lewis offered further reassurance. Lewis, Clara, if anything happens, you can come to my house and bring your kid. Clara, that always happened whenever anything was done to a couple. The other member of the couple would get a lot of attention. You're different. You're special. Whatever. These men whom I cared about made a real effort to get me to stand with them in their condemnation of him, Hugh, and to see him with their eyes. I betrayed our bond in that time. There was always truth in the accusations. There were seeds of truth. There was stuff in me that both wanted to hear and saw some of the things they were saying, and that part of me that was always dependent on Hugh was delighted to get that much attention from these men in this group, just delighted, and support for my teaching and all that came after that time. There was just one of those times that I betrayed Hugh and betrayed the bond we had from all those years together. The meeting with these men had been carefully planned by Alex, and he had met with them earlier to lay out the strategy they were going to use on Clara. The splitting of couples was one of the most malignant and prominent features of Alex's tyranny. The foundation whereby he established and increased his control over the members of Life Force. The support and reality testing provided a given member by his or her trusted partner was subverted. Ties and loyalty that suppressed his or her sense of self-worth were compromised. The guilt experience may have provided substance to the charges later on that the couple harbored evil forces, accusations hurled at them by Alex, the person orchestrating their mutual betrayal. This direct attempt to split the Robinsons capitalized on the erosion that had already taken place in their relationship. Ever-increasing demands on their time left almost no opportunity for them to be together. Circles of silence, the structure of secrecy that Alex established, further weakened their relationship. The executive committee did not share what happened at their meetings with the senior members. Those at the next level down, they, in turn, withheld information from those below them. The members who did not share, they in turn withheld information from those below them, the members, who did not share with the students. Finally, in the year before graduate school opened, Hugh and the other executive committee members were asked to take formal vows of secrecy. Hugh was not to confide in Clara, as he had been doing, as he had done with similar matters in the past. Hugh protested, struggled, but then yielded to the pressure. When he was thrown off the executive committee, he was not able to share what had happened with his wife, nor did she confide in him about what had been said to her. A few months went by before Clara also found herself in trouble. She was said to have bad energy. This time it was Hugh who was asked to cooperate with the group in dealing with her. When he went out of town to teach, they persuaded him to leave Clara a note saying that he wouldn't have any contact with her during the 10 days that he would be away. Soon after, they put Clara in quarantine. Quarantine was a procedure of restricting a member to his or her house or apartment, having contact with no one except Alex or the other executive, or one other executive that Alex might designate. Quarantine members were supposed to reflect upon their bad energy, or power trips, or their elemental, basic evil, whatever fault had been detected by Alex. They waited until a phone call came, which might mean processed for hours by Alex or an executive until they saw the error of their ways. Hugh. I remember waiting 14 hours for a phone call in total panic, and it turned out the executive committee had decided not to call me and had gone to bed. And I was sitting there, waiting. The period of quarantine was one of acute deprivation, lasting days or months. To an outsider, there seemed to be no reason for a member to put up with it. To understand, one must recognize that despite the negative aspect of life force, there were also times when the members laughed together, when the entire group was close and caring, times when they shared food and felt a love for each other that seemed genuine and precious. In quarantine, all this was withdrawn. Hugh. People who a day before you had been laughing with, having fun with, working with, would just turn their eyes away. They wouldn't even make eye contact. If you have the experience of love and then you're cut off from it, there's a tremendous motivation to get back to it, a tremendous desire to reconnect with that love. And you'll do anything to get back because it makes you feel good. Makes you feel you're a good person. The effort to split the Robinsons continued. When Clara fell from grace, Hugh was exhorted to stand up to her. Be a man. Hugh later recalled a particular moment when Alex said, Hugh, we want you to own your power. Hugh, for just a minute, I had a perception of hell. I saw a devil's face, red, everything. It was a perception that the totally opposite thing was happening than he was saying. I saw that this was hell, and that the perception, went again. I rationalized and said, he wants me to own my power, so I'm going to go stand up to Clara. I couldn't. I came back from England. She'd been isolated 10 days. She met me at the door. She was in tears. I came and sat with her, and we had a good talk. Later, I told Alex and the others that we'd talked, and I got lambasted for giving in, for being manipulated by her tears. They said that I should have been tough and told her to cut out the bullshit. Well, I didn't. Following the establishment of graduate school, Alex had placed more and more stress on the elemental, which he defined as evil, selfishness, the opposite of spirituality, the Antichrist. This concept came from the esoteric system the group had studied, but Alex magnified it until protecting the group from evil from within and without became the major focus of the group's activities. Members who opposed him were said to be yielding to their selfish side, identifying with it, harming the group and themselves through its influence. Although not directly stated, the implied message was that the only hope to free themselves from their own evil lay in Alex's guidance, as Clara recalled. The message was, if you don't watch out, if you don't look, if you don't see evil, if you don't listen to me, you will be caught in eternal hell. The ultimate in devaluation was directed against anyone who left the group. They were declared to have completely given into their selfishness, their badness, and whatever had been good in them, their soul itself, was said to have been left behind in the group. Such people were shunned as contaminating forces. They were declared to have turned against their own souls. Clara, once you left, they didn't speak to you again. They passed you on the street without speaking, even though you'd been with them for years. There was a feeling towards the end that you ought to be careful of who you got involved with, because you could lose anyone at any minute. Someone you really loved might just go or get bad, so don't get too involved. Anyone you saw as good might flip and become bad. Any day, your husband, your best friend, that's a strange feeling. Alex was feared because he could judge someone to be bad and the rest of the group would go along. Dissent was invariably punished. Clara, when he would say, Mary is selfish, we could usually pick out things that would support that. Your seeing would be affected by it. Oh yeah, I remember when I had lunch with her last week, and you'd take an incident that in another setting you might not notice, but you could pull them out, particularly if you wanted to get in good with him at that moment. You would look for those times. You'd certainly not say, I haven't seen that. That hasn't been my experience. Boy, if you disagreed with how Alex was seeing it, you were in deep trouble. The times I did were invariably used against me, if not at the moment, then later. Opposition of any kind could call forth processing so that the member could see that he or she had been giving in to their selfish nature. Such experiences could be devastating. Clara, I had 2 experiences of being in a large group where I was on the spot for supposedly not being a good person. With about 18 people, my friends, bringing up information about why I wasn't a good person. I don't think I've ever been through anything so awful in my life. But I bought it. I think that in some funny way, those meetings were usually triggered by a time when a person was seeing that something was wrong. Being difficult. When Alex said, we're going to have 3 campuses, continue the Journal of Life Force Psychology, and start a training program to compete with independent life force groups in other cities. I said, how can we possibly do this? My question was met with a stony silence from the whole group. Erica worked with me for 3 or 4 hours the next day to let me see that that was my elemental that had asked the question, not just my common sense. Coupled with the emphasis on evil was Alex Monroe's growing interest in and belief in past lives, a theory of reincarnation at the group level. Alex told the executive committee that they had all been together in many past lives and he had them play out past life scenarios. One of the first past lives was called the Persian past life. Alex was a priest in ancient Persia. Hugh was a king, and there was a church-state conflict. Everyone had a part, typically. Alex did not need to specify the others' roles. Patricia, another member, whom Hugh had been trying to protect from criticism by the executive committee, became a sister. The priest, Alex, burned Patricia at the stake. Thus, the group fantasy translated events happening within the group into terms of past lives. Give me 1 second. Alex's control over the Life Force members' lives increased further. Each day they were supposed to fill out timesheets detailing every activity conducted throughout the day. Although most hated this, the procedure was rationalized as improving efficiency as it soon became an instrument of control. These sheets were often collected and looked over when a member was thought to be a problem. Then there would be a meeting with one or more of the executive committee, who would take the errant person to task. Meeting with people outside the group required the permission of the executive committee. Behind them, controlling everything, was Alex. Supporting Alex's power, keeping the members committed to the organization, no matter how bizarre their lives became, was the shared belief that they were a special group, doing work of great importance to the world. Clara, I think in the end, we believed that we were the only people doing this. And I remember thinking, isn't this strange that our little group sitting around could be this special group? I think we had the feeling that Alex was an important articulator of the Christ, or the coming of the Christ. I think he believed that I think he believed that more and more himself. Hugh's behavior continued to be bad, and he was placed under surveillance. When he went to Baltimore to conduct a workshop, Margaret, one of the executive committee, accompanied and supervised him. Hugh's mother and father lived in Baltimore, but he was not allowed to stay with them. Instead, he checked into a motel. When he did visit his parents, Margaret went with him. Hugh's brother was involved in the Baltimore Life Force group, and a few months after Hugh's visit there, trouble developed. Hugh. Alex used his power to split up the Baltimore group, and my brother became the evil one there. Alex got 3 of the people to put him and a friend out in 24 hours, telling them they couldn't come to their office. A kind of strong-arm job was tremendously upsetting to my brother because his friends, with whom he had built this thing, turned against him. My mother got very upset, understandably, and called up one of her friends in the center, who she knew, and said, "What is going on there?" As far as Alex was concerned, this intervention by Hugh's mother made her a source of evil. Hugh. I went to lunch with Alex, some of the other executives, and he said that evil energy was coming from my mother towards the group, so I was going to have to cut off from her. I remember feeling this terror because I had seen this happen in other situations and said, "Oh my God, it's coming here." But again, I was immobilized, filled with fear and self-doubt, afraid to resist. We did a long session that afternoon. I connected with the Christ. Alex used the thing of, Christ says, "You have to leave your father and mother in order to follow me." I bought it, and although I again had this terribly ambivalent feeling of disconnection and confusion and being in over my head, yet at the same time being too afraid to disagree, so I felt I had to go along with it. He wrote to his parents, expressing anger at them for criticizing the organization, telling them that what happened in Baltimore had nothing to do with his group. His parents wrote back letters of apology, which Alex read. For a moment, Alex was moved by the letters and admitted that they were very beautiful. Then, a half hour later, he declared the letters were too perfect. He was ordered to cut from his mother, as well as from his brother. This demand was made despite the fact that during that period, Hugh's brother was ill, diagnosed as having cancer. What had been oppressive control by the group and Alex was becoming horrific. The horror can be sensed by visualizing the procedure of cutting, which was practiced more and more in the later phase of the group. Cutting was a process in which members separated themselves from whoever had been declared a source of evil energy, a friend, lover, parent, husband, or wife. They were to visualize cords stretching from their hearts to the heart of the other person. Then they were instructed to cut the cords. Sometimes they would go a step further and burn the image, visualizing the person being consumed by flames. Later, when Clara reflected on all that happened, the cutting she had done was one of the things that was still painful, about which she felt the most ashamed. I feel I betrayed myself at these times. I let myself do that. On some level, it didn't seem right. It felt wrong. We asked about it. Why was this necessary? And Alex would say, "Well, it's not really them that you're burning. It's your projection of them." I feel sad that I did that. That one feels really hard to live with. Hugh discontinued all communication with his parents. His brother became more and more ill, but phone calls from the brother went unanswered. During this time, Clara was increasingly critical of Hugh. seeing him as identified with his elemental, accepting Alex's evaluation of him and believing with the group that his refusal to speak to his family was correct, although difficult. The rest of the group also supported his action and rewarded him with positive attention. Q. I got a lot of reinforcement from it, which reinforced my desire to get back into the group. Here were these people approving of me cutting off my parents, but there was a lot of dread and not wanting to go on, not knowing how we could get out of this nightmare. But I didn't know how to get out, short of leaving, and that didn't cross my mind. I guess by that time I knew that if I left, I would have lost Clara and David, his son. Hugh's sister visited him and told him that their brother was worse and that his parents were desperately trying to get through to him, calling the center repeatedly but being cut off. Hugh called Debbie, one of Alex's inner circle, and told her something must be done. It was agreed that Hugh would phone his brother, but that call would be taped and monitored by Alex and Debbie. Hugh. Strangely enough, in the middle of all this chaos, my brother and I sort of reached through to this place of connection between the two of us. Talking about his dying, how much we loved each other, how we cared. I have this tape which I listen to every once in a while. About a week later, Alex worked on Clara to convince her to tell Hugh to leave the house. Clara. Alex said Hugh's energy continued to be bad, and I, too, felt that Hugh didn't seem good. And then, after a meeting with about 10 other people watching, Alex talked with me to the point of my deciding what was really best for Hugh was for me to ask him to leave the house. And I cried and cried and cried. It was very hard. As soon as Clara agreed to tell Hugh to leave, something happened to her that seemed to validate the decision. When I made that choice, I had a lot of energy coming in. I mean, literally. Not only did everyone in the room say, Clara, you're so brave and I really support this and I see how hard it is, but something happened in my head. I felt sort of strong and full. I saw this happen to Mary when she chose to leave Bill, to stay in the group and let Bill quit. The same kind of downflow happened. It's like some letting go and you get more energy. I interpreted it inwardly. Oh, not only do they say it is all right, but look what is happening to me. I saw it again and again. For instance, when Margaret announced that she was leaving Fred, when Dick announced that he was divorcing Connie and was never going to see Connie and his children again, and that has got to be one of the worst stories in the whole group. All those times those people looked big and shiny. Margaret, when she said, I'm not going to be with Fred, looked as beautiful as I had ever seen her. And inside of me, I went, God, it must be right. Look at her. Probably what Clara and the other members in such situations experienced was the effect of a sudden release from an intense conflict that was tearing at them, coupled with a childlike surrender, a letting go to the protection and power of the parent-family group. Later on, when he or she finally left Life Force, the reality of what had been done became clear. Clara experienced this letting go phenomenon again when a short time later she was asked to break off communication with her own mother. I know this secondhand. They said one night, Clara has got to leave her mother. That came up around the dinner table. So they called me down. They worked on me, and I just wouldn't budge on it. And Alex said, Clara, I think you're asking Hugh to do something you're not willing to do. That was heavy, and I realized that was probably true. And then he had me go up in imagery, and there was a star we used to see, and he said, ask the star what to do. And then somehow the star said something about, you need to let go of your mother and follow me, or something like that. What happened was that, again, I got that really big hit of rightness. I cried and then, oh, that's right, I do need to do that. I remember at that moment, Alex was saying, if you do that, he, Christ, can take care of her too. Help her more. And I said, "Oh, that's right. At that moment, I thought I was loving her, and that he, Alex, was too." Clara got her phone disconnected and changed her number so that her mother could no longer reach her. Her very perception of her mother was altered. When I was out of touch with my mother, I would get letters from her, and I would read them in the set context that she, or part of her, was trying to get me away from this work, trying to get me off my spiritual path. When you read a letter with that in your head, it almost feels like there's negative energy in the letter. It's amazing because I've also seen those letters later when it wasn't like that at all. A week later, Hugh made his last phone call to his dying brother. Clara told him to leave the house. He packed his bags and spent the night in a motel. Hugh, it was the worst night of my life. I felt like I had lost everything. There was no Clara, no David, no contact with group members and family members. My only contact was with Alex and Debbie. I was totally surrounded in darkness. I did come through that night realizing two things. That light was important, spiritual light, and that giving was important. A few weeks later, Hugh's brother died. His family had been sending telegrams as his condition worsened, but Clara, having been told that Hugh did not want to see them, passed them on to the executive committee. Hugh. By then, they had influenced her very much. I certainly felt betrayed by her, too. But my brother died, and I didn't even know when. That was one request I made to Alex and Debbie, that I would know the day he died. They wouldn't tell me because they said I was holding on to my brother. I found out that he had died a week or so after when my sister was threatening to come find me. The executive committee had to do something, had to tell me. Otherwise, I don't think they would have. Hugh continued in quarantine, having contact only with the executive committee. Several months after Clara asked him to leave the house, the group began pressing her to file for divorce. She resisted, but eventually agreed and wrote to Hugh informing him of her decision. When she told her son David of the plan, he became very upset, screamed, and pounded on the floor, and then ran out of the house. When he finally returned, he phoned Alex's children, who were his friends. This created a disturbance in the Monroe household, with the result that Alex's wife Barbara had to be processed. Alex had no sympathy for David's distress and interpreted his behavior as showing that David was elemental, that he was using his pain at his parents' separation to manipulate people. It was a theory of Alex's that when a child is born, the mother sees the evil part of the baby but does not want to recognize it. He said that it was very important that the mother, in this case Clara, be aware of the evil element in her child and teach him not to act on it. Alex told Clara to go to a special room at the center where she could scream, sound pillows, and express rage at David, while he, Alex, guided the experience over telephone. As standard procedure, a team of group members gathered in another location to support the processing by engaging in subjective work, cleaning up Clara from contaminating influences. 1 second. Clara. They would be saying, "Well, I see Clara connected with David. Let's cut Clara from David and let's burn David's image. Oh, and Clara is connected with Lewis too. And Hugh. Let's clean her up. Cut her from them." Throughout the session, Alex kept insisting that Clara see the evil part in David. Clara, I remember saying, "I don't want to see this. I don't want to see this." And Alex saying tenderly, "Clara, it's all right. It's all right. He's just a boy trying to find his way." And I thought, oh, that's right, and you can help him. You can help him with it, the evil part, if you let yourself see it. I believed it for a few days, and Alex would tell me that I really needed to discipline David. There was a lot of stuff about David's evil part. It really pushed me to my limit. After Hugh received Clara's letter asking for a divorce, He wrote back that he still wanted responsibility for his son, whom he hadn't seen in 4 months. He gave the letter to the executive committee, who kept it and did not give it to Clara. Clara. We came to fear and distrust each other. He was afraid that I was this awful way, and I was afraid that he was the way Alex was telling me. We were taught to see each other as evil. Everybody began to see everybody as predominantly this evil part, this part that was selfish and wanted to control people, that was separative, and so forth. At this stage, to leave the group was a fearsome step because it meant literally to be damned. Increasingly, one's spiritual fate became identified with the group, so we all thought our souls were members of this group, and that if you got taken over by your evil part, you would be cut off from your soul. This is the way to salvation, and if you deviate in any way, you're siding with your evil part. You're identifying with it. You're making it bigger. If you thought about leaving the group, you had to face the fact that in that system, you'd be spiritually damned. Members came to believe that without the help of Alex Monroe and the Life Force group, a person would have no chance of avoiding the left-hand path. Their evil side would overcome them despite their best intentions. Clara, it was never really said, but that was the implication. To leave meant to be eternally lost or caught, trapped in the selfish, comfort-seeking part of you that didn't care about the larger world, about relieving suffering. We began to talk about it more and more, and people who left were seen just that way. Poor Janine, she just went into her selfishness. When we finally left, that was the fear we had to struggle with. Nevertheless, Carla did manage to leave the group, just 3 days after she was to start divorce proceedings against Hugh. At that time, she had been in quarantine again. First, when Hugh was quarantined, I was very much in favor and getting lots of attention. Then I lost favor. I began to be seen as bad by Alex and a number of other people. One of them was Mary, a close friend. She turned me into Alex, and that was really the final straw. If Mary is going to see me in this way, who else is there? I'm not with my husband. I'm out of contact with my parents. I'm making my son bad, and now Mary thinks I'm bad. One morning, Clara was told that the executive committee had some subjective work for her to do. For the first time, Clara refused. She was immediately told to cut from Lewis and Hal, who both had recently left the group, and 2 or 3 other members who were thought to be influencing her. Clara, I don't know if I even did it, but I said that I need to take the day off. I walked all day long around where Hugh was living, hoping I would run into him. I think that was the day I began to consider going and to let that thought be a reality. The fact that Lewis and Hal had left already really influenced me. Leaving became an option in that in that universe. It suddenly became a possibility. Something you can do. Leaving exists. It was real, and it hadn't been up till then. For Clara, the deciding issue was her son. Sometimes I thought what enabled me to leave was the mother lion energy in me. It was like my husband, my parents, my friends, but not my baby. You can't have them. I don't care if you're right about this. I'm not going to let you have them. And you got me out of there as much as anything did. And that got me out of there as much as anything did. Alex was capturing every piece of my life, every relationship I had, every piece of time. Oh God, capturing it and taking it unto himself. I'm glad I had a child. That was the touchstone. Although in the week before I left, there was one moment when I considered I would give up if Alex asked me to. I remember that thought coming into my head. Am I really committed here? Would I give up my son if I was asked to? And I thought, maybe I would. If other people have given up their children, so it isn't something that might not have happened. That night she told a representative group that she wanted to stay, but she wanted 3 things: have dinner with her son each night, to go to bed at midnight and get up at 7 instead of 3 or 4. Members of the group had been averaging from 4 to 6 hours of sleep for over a year, and have some time for herself, swim, and garden. She was challenged. Clara, if you had to let go of those things for the group, would you? Clara replied angrily, I don't know why I should. I don't know why it has to be that way. The response was, well, you'd better think about it some more. That was the night, really. As soon as I hung up the phone, I went upstairs and called a close friend who was outside the group. It happened very fast. She was someone who had been in a spiritual group. She had known Alex and something about Life Force, so I knew she's someone who would understand the spiritual commitment we had made. I didn't want to talk to someone who would be critical of all that. She was wonderful. She didn't just say leave or anything. It was like a little crack opened. I said, just talk. Just keep talking. So she said, I've made this commitment to my family, and I'm committed to our work as a spiritual group as well. And it was like the sky opened up a little bit. And I said, just keep saying more things. And she did. Said things that somehow made me know that I wasn't going to need to give up my spiritual commitment if I left. There were many ways to free your soul. One could live a family life, and that her caring for her children was part of a commitment to God, and her commitment to her husband was part of that too. And I would say, I hope I will be able to help people. And she said, Clara, you already are. You already have helped many people. Things like that. It was very, very important. And I hung up the phone, and then I called her back 10 minutes later and said, say some more things. And the crack got a little bigger. Clara stayed up all night, over and over. She played a tape of Mother Teresa talking about working with the poor, about kindness and Christ. It was sort of lovely to be close to that, to get some perspective. I could feel my response, wanting to heal and wanting to help. She was expressing my resonance with that, particularly the kindness. The kindness was all gone from the group by that time. Just the gentle kindness I could feel that I have some, and that somehow I had betrayed a lot during that time. So I listened to that tape. And then at one point I realized that the energy that I thought we were working with was in me, and that it would be in me even if I left the group. I really had that experience. It was not just all mental, but all the way through me. When I realized that, I knew I could leave. I decided that what I needed to do, I wrote a note. I'm leaving the group. It is no longer a place that I want to be. I don't know what my service will be now, but I know it needs to involve family and children more than this does. The next morning, I dropped it in Alex's box, and then I ran into Hugh almost immediately afterwards. Leaving was not joyful. Clara had joined Life Force because it made her feel loved and accepted. It had been a way to help others. At this point, she felt worthless, evil, and alone. She doubted her ability to help anyone. Give me a minute here. For a week, I didn't tell anyone that I had left except Hugh. I just sat upstairs in a chair. That first night, I kept feeling that there was an enormous cloud of darkness just off my fingertips, or on the edge of the room, or certainly down in the direction of the center. I had to keep it out. I had to protect myself from it. I made a circle on the floor of a book of Gandhi and the Mother Teresa tapes, and I had a picture of Kathy Kollwitz of Mary and Elizabeth embracing. Like a protective circle, good friends who had made a spiritual commitment to the world. I wanted them near me. The great fear was that I was bad. The picture of my future was that I would do penance, redeem myself in some way. I volunteered at a nearby hospital on the cancer ward, and I worked there 3 mornings a week for the next few months. I just wanted to give people water and hold their heads. I was still grappling with maybe I was really bad. I wrote and wrote and wrote about it in my journal. I kept wishing someone would tell me that I was good. I also knew that I wouldn't do it. Eventually, in meditation, I was saying something deep in myself. I really want to help. And I heard a voice say, I know you do. And then it was all right. That was the turning point. Then I knew that I was still good, that I was still the person who wanted to love and wanted to make my commitment to love. I didn't really wonder about it after that time. Working it through on my own was real important. Something I had to figure out for myself that I don't think anyone else could have told me. I feel proud of that moment, of staying with that. I think I'm going to chop the chapters here. We'll do a part 2 of chapter 2.